A powerful symbol of loss, a daughter now without a father.
This is what those officers took from me. At the end of the day, they get to go home and be with their families. Shiana does not have a father. Down the aisle.
The mother of George Floyd's daughter calling for justice.
I'm here for my baby. And I'm here for George because I want justice for him. I want justice for him because he was good.
The frustration at the lack of accountability around police brutality grows all across the United States. Dozens of cities saw mostly peaceful demonstrations continue in violation of curfew orders.
As long as I can remember, there has been a systematic inequality in this country. I can only attest to what I know. I can attest to being profiled. I can attest to being a marginalized person. And if we don't speak up against injustice anywhere, then no one will speak up against it.
US President Donald Trump called for the National Guard or military to crack down on what he called thieves and thugs responsible for violence. But the protests go on. The demonstrators are keen to avoid the thug label. This man booed for vandalizing a street sign in Washington, D.C. Police grew impatient as the night went on. In New York City, officers began arresting people for not following the curfew.
Move! There's a curfew, move!
But with many protesters around the country refusing to go home, the world watches on to see just how much force will be authorized by officials.
Let's go now to the west coast of the U.S. and DW's Melissa Chan standing by for us in Los Angeles. Good day to you, Melissa. Can you give us the latest on the protests where you are?
Well, Brian, we're an hour from midnight, so pretty far into the evening. And what I understand right now, the latest from Seattle up north, is that there is activity. Here in Los Angeles County, it's been quieter than Monday night. On Monday night, we saw hundreds of arrests, particularly in the Hollywood area. Most of the arrests were violating the curfew, not for looting, although that continues. Again, like the pattern we've seen over the past few days, we've seen peaceful protests by day, and when the sun goes down, that's when we get the looting, with police saying that some of it appears to be organized crime being involved in that.
How are these ongoing demonstrations, the 8th day now, affecting the measures to contain the coronavirus and everyday life for the millions of people in LA County?
There's several things going on, right? First of all, across the United States, and particularly in LA County in California, the COVID pandemic has not really been brought under control. I mean, the numbers are the highest of all counties in California here in Los Angeles. We're not as far along as in Europe. And so people are dealing with social distancing measures, lockdown measures for that, in addition to the curfew measures. So it's like a double lockdown, in addition to the frustration that tens of millions of Americans across the country are unemployed. And the latest information we have is that about a third of people who applied for unemployment have not received their checks yet. And it's been a few months into this pandemic period.
Yeah, the numbers there are huge. Unemployment was 5.5 million. It's now at about 36 million. Let's talk about the other coast, Melissa. The mayor of New York is under pressure for his handling of the protests there. And that comes as 1 million people there talking about unemployment in New York have now lost their jobs over the past few months. And homelessness in New York is exploding.
Yeah, New York has been the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, and as a result, the epicenter of a lot of the frustration. I mean, essentially, you've had a country, and a lot of other countries too, of course, but sit at home unemployed the last few months. Americans have had the chance to really think about what kind of future they want for this country. There's an election going on. So there's been a lot of reflection from people about what they want. Look, I was at the Black Lives Matter protest in Minneapolis 5 years ago. Nothing's changed. That is the thing that is really frustrating a lot of people, and that's what's bringing them out to the streets, despite the fact that they know that social distancing is important. But clearly, from all the footage, that's not happening. People think this is important.
Melissa, great to see you. Thanks so much for that from Los Angeles today.
Well, our Washington bureau chief, Alexandra von Namen, is standing by near the White House. Alexandra, I see people there looking like they're ready to march, standing apart from a safe distance. What can you tell us about where you are right now?
So we are here at the Lafayette Park, which is directly in the neighborhood of the White House. So it's just really a few steps away from the White House. And as you can see behind me and in front of me, there are a lot of people, quite large crowds tonight. And all of them are here, even though the curfew in Washington, D.C. just started 2 minutes ago. So they are clearly determined to defy the curfew. So they are chanting here George Floyd's name. They want this name to be forgotten. They are chanting justice must be done. And of course also vote him out, meaning that they would like President Trump not to get re-elected in November.
All right, so as these protesters remembering the name of George Floyd, we've heard Trump threatening military action. Does he have the authority to bring in the army against Americans?
Well, when you phrase the question this way, that of course you would assume that the President of the United States cannot do that. And when you talk to the protesters here, they are upset and very angry, accusing the President of trying to provoke and scare them. But he does indeed have the authority to invoke the Insurrection Act, a legislation that is 200 years old and was used in the U.S., in American history a couple of times. And that legislation allows the President of the U.S. to deploy the U.S. military to end violence, civil disorder, revolution or rebellion. But of course, normally the states would ask him to invoke this act, and it's quite politically difficult to use this act against the states. It only happened when you can argue that they are not able to do so on their own, or if they are rebelling against the federal government. So this threat was met with a lot of criticism here in the U.S. Even Pentagon officials were criticizing that, saying that, you know, the Americans shouldn't get used to see uniformed service members in the streets, and that this step would further escalate the situation.
Alexandra von Namen in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for your reporting.
Well, outrage at the death of George Floyd in police custody has spread around the world, with demonstrations in many countries to protest police brutality and racism. Thousands of people in Paris defying a ban on large gatherings to protest the 2016 death of a young black man there in police custody, that young Frenchman of Malian origin, and to express their anger at systemic racism in France. Many of the demonstrators carrying signs with slogans linked to the Black Lives Matter movement in the U.S. The demonstration went off peacefully. That was until police used tear gas to disperse the crowd after protesters pelted them with a number of different objects. Well, earlier we spoke with DW correspondent in Paris, Lisa Lois. She talked to us about some of the issues that have led to the protests in France.
Feeling here is certainly that there hasn't been much change, and if there has been change, actually in the wrong way. It's been in the wrong way. You know, just look back over the past few years. There have been lots of demonstrations, especially the Yellow Vest protests, and there was a lot of police violence. Now the parliament here is even discussing a new law, a draft law that would forbid people from spreading images of the police. And many people feel that that would take away a big part of their protection from police violence here in France. So there is a lot of mistrust amongst people towards the police, and it's growing really.